fourth lesson, and in our fourth lesson, we shall be looking at the plant organs. Now, the plants have a variety of organs which function together to bring about the overall functions of a plant. So we do know, already we looked at the plants, we said they're made up of different types of cells, and the cells can come together to form the different types of tissues that we find in the plants, and then the tissues end up forming different organs that are found in the plant. So here now we shall look at the structure. As we talk about the plant organs, we look at the structure of the shoot, the structure of the root, and look at the differences in the structure of the dicot and monocot stems and roots. So as we look at the organs associated with the plants, we have the plant organs are basically divided into two. We have those that are associated with the shoot and those that are associated with the root. So basically, for the shoot of the plant, it is made up of two portions. That is the vegetative part and the reproductive part. Now, the vegetative part of the plant or of the shoot is associated with the organs that are the leaves. We have the stem and the branches if they are there. So those ones form the vegetative part of the shoot of the plant. And we tend to find, generally, the stem and the branches play a supporting role, where the leaves have a number of functions that they carry out. The leaves play the role of being the site for photosynthesis, being or providing the surface where respiration takes place, and so forth. And they are adapted to this particular function, basically by having an arrangement of specific cells within the leaf, and also in terms of arrangement of the stomata and distribution of the stomata on the surface of the leaf. Now, for the reproductive parts of the shoot, reproductive part basically is associated with the organs involved in reproduction. So the organs associated with the reproductive part, here we find the flowers and the fruits. So generally, in summary, for the plant organs associated with the shoot, we group them into two, those associated with the shoot and those associated with the root. For the shoot system, we have got the parts or organs associated with the vegetative part and organs associated with the reproductive part. Vegetative part comprises of the part of the shoot that is not involved in reproduction, and that has got the organs, that is the leaves, the stems, and the branches. The reproductive part of the shoot involves the organs that are involved in reproduction, and that comprises of the flowers and the fruits. Now, generally, for the shoot system and the organs associated with it, it involves the organs found above the soil surface. And for these organs above the soil surface, also referred to as the phyllosphere, they are the ones that do the business, especially so the leaves, of absorbing the light that is necessary for the purposes of photosynthesis. And the leaves act as the surface where photosynthesis takes place, or the organ of photosynthesis. And then we have also the branches as well as the stems, as we said, and the branches and the stems play the role of support. And then we have the root system. Root system basically comprises of the roots and the associated structures. Now, the root is the part of the plant found below the soil surface, and it is therefore also referred to as the rhizosphere, since it is found below the soil surface. Now, for the root system, basically it comprises of the roots, that is the main organ found there, and the root plays the role of providing anchorage of the plant, so it anchors the plant to the soil, and it also plays the role of absorption of water and mineral salts. And basically, for the organs of the plant, that is mainly what we have. The other organs we have associated with the plant, we talked about the vegetative organs, where there are the reproductive organs. And the reproductive organs, we said it is the ones associated with reproduction. And that comprises the flowers and the fruits. So for the flowers and the fruits, or the reproductive organs, we shall look at them in our next lesson. So this marks the end of our lesson for today, which is our lesson 4. Now welcome to our 5th lesson. And this is based on the reproductive structures of the plant. The reproductive structures of the plant, we say they form the reproductive parts of the plant. In this particular lesson, we shall look at the structure of the flower, which is a main reproductive part of a plant, especially so in the angiosperms, which are the flowering plants. We shall look at the structure of the flower. We shall describe the reproductive organs associated with the flower. Now, for the flower, we say the flower is the reproductive structure in the flowering plants, where the flowering plants basically are the angiosperms, and the angiosperms are the plants, the most complex plants, that are highly adapted to life on land. And one of the things that makes them to be so highly adapted to life on land is the fact that they produce flowers. Now, the flowers contribute to their adaptation and their complexity because the flowers tend to be adapted for different pollinating agents, therefore maximizing the survival of these particular plants. Now, in terms of the structure of the plant, we find the plant basically is made up of what we describe as 4 sets of modified leaves. And the 4 sets of modified leaves associated with the flower, we have the sepals, that is the outermost set of leaves. Now, the sepals tend to be green in color. They are small in size, and they play a role. And the role of the sepals is that they protect the flower when it is still a bud. And because of their green coloring, they also play a role in photosynthesis. And then we have the next set of leaves, modified leaves, that is the petals, also referred to as the corolla. For the corolla or the petals, they tend to be large in size, just as in our illustration. They tend to be colored, and they have got bright colors. And the purpose of the petals is that with their bright colors, they tend to attract various pollinating agents, and they also tend to protect the male and female reproductive structures found within the flower. Now, the color of the petals and even its structure is adapted to attracting different pollinating agents. And we can tell the kind of pollinating agent a flower attracts by looking at its color and its structure. Generally, petals that are brightly colored, they tend to attract insects. When you find petals that are fairly larger and then they've got a bright red or yellow color, those ones tend to attract the birds. When you come across petals that are fairly large in size and they are white in color, those ones tend to attract the small mammals, that is the rodents and the bats. So the petals are modified to attracting different pollinating agents that basically cause or increase survival of the plants. And then within the petals, we find the other set of modified leaves that gives us the male reproductive organs, that is the stamens. Now the stamen is the male reproductive organ in the plant, and it comprises of two main parts. It has got a filament, on top of which it bears an anther. Now inside the anther is where we find the pollen sacs, within which pollen grains are formed. And pollen grains are the male gametes in plants. The filament plays the role of providing nutrients to the pollen sacs in the anther. So the collection of the anther and its filament forms the stamen, which is the male reproductive organ, also referred to as the androecium. And then we have the innermost set of modified leaves, giving us the pistil, also referred to as carpels, also referred to as the gynoecium. Now, the female reproductive organ, or the pistils for that matter, is made up of the ovary at the base, within which we find the ovules, and then it has got the style, on top of which we have the stigma. The stigma tends to be sticky, and this is where the pollen grains land onto during the process of pollination. So for the structure of the flower, we say the flower is basically the reproductive structure of the plant that is made up of 4 sets of modified leaves. The 4 sets being the sepals, the petals, the stamens, and the carpels or the pistils. And for the flowers, we said they vary in terms of size, in terms of color, and even in terms of shape. And we said the different colors and shapes they may have, and even the size, is an adaptation to the different pollinating agents that the flowers tend to attract. And basically, these are the different parts of flowers that you've already talked about. You've mentioned you expect to find the sepals, the petals, the stamens, and the carpels. Now, for the structure and functions of the various parts of the flower, as you mentioned them, just to summarize them, we have got generally, we have the sepals, which we said they do the business of protecting the flower in the bud stage and also do photosynthesis. The petals, brightly colored, they attract pollinating agents. The stamens, this is the male reproductive organs within the plant. And we say they comprise of the anther at the top there, within which you find the pollen sacs, where the pollen grains are formed. And we say the pollen grains are the male gametes, or the male sex cells of the plant. There is the stigma associated with the female reproductive organ. And we say this is the part where the pollen grains land onto during the process of pollination. We mentioned the ovary. The ovary is found at the base of the pistil, and we say this is where the ovules are found. Ovules being basically the ones containing the female gametes in the plant, where the female gamete within the ovule is actually the embryo sac, where the egg cell is found in. And then we find in some plants, we may find the pistil also having the nectary. The nectary basically produces nectar, which is a sugary solution, and wherever the plant produces nectar, nectar plays the role of attracting insects. Now, having summarized the flower, which you said is the reproductive structure containing the male and female reproductive organs in the plant, we'll have a look at now what happens in the process of reproduction in the plant. So now look at the process of fertilization and also look at fruit formation. So we shall look at the types of pollination that there are, fertilization, and also formation of fruits and seeds in the plant. Now, we already looked at the structure of the plant, and we talked about having the stamens, which comprise of the anther, within which we have the pollen sacs where the pollen grains are formed. And we've got the pistil, where we have the stigma, where the pollen grains land onto for pollination to take place. So in terms of reproduction in the process in the plant now, the process starts with pollination, where basically pollination is the process of the transfer of pollen grains from the stamens where they were formed, generally to the stigma, which is the female reproductive organ. So that process of transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma is what you're referring to as pollination. Now, as pollination takes place, it is normally assisted by various agents that we refer to as pollinating agents. Now, the pollinating agents vary. So all those things that assist in the pollination, transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma, the ones they're referring to as the pollinating agents. And there is a variety of agents. Wind is one example of a pollinating agent. We have the insects are pollinating agents. The birds are pollinating agents. The small mammals, that is the bats and the rodents, are pollinating agents. Sometimes man also can be a pollinating agent. So you have quite a number of pollinating agents. Now, in the process of pollination, which is the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma, we can have the pollen grains moving from the anther in a plant and landing on the stigma of a plant on the same plant. Now, when that happens, we talk about the plant has had pollination within itself, giving us self-pollination. And we can also have the pollen grains from the anther in the flower in one plant, now landing on the stigma of a flower of a plant, a flower of another plant, but of the same species. Now, when that happens, that the pollen grains from one plant land on the stigma of another plant, then that one is referred to as cross-pollination. So when it comes to pollination, therefore, we have got types of pollination depending on what happens during the pollination process. So the types of pollination, just like mentioned, we have got self-pollination, which takes place when the pollen grains from the anther of a flower lands on the stigma of a flower on the same individual plant. And then we've got cross-pollination, where we have pollen grains from the anther of a flower landing on the stigma of a flower on a different plant of the same species. And as much as we have the two types of self-pollination, we have a number of plants tend to minimize self-pollination, and cross-pollination is preferred over self-pollination for a reason, in that cross-pollination brings about a mixing of the genes between two different plants, and that enhances survival of the plant. So you've got the two types of pollination, and cross is normally preferred over self-pollination, as much as each of them has got its advantages and also its disadvantages. Now, self-pollination, the advantages that it has is that a plant basically can reproduce on its own. It doesn't have to need other members of the species in order for pollination to take place. But then we have in self-pollination, there is less mixing or interaction of genes, so the plants produced tend to be similar with similar challenges. So should a risk factor arise in the environment and tends to kill the plants, then there is a risk of the entire population of plants being lost because there is no variation. Now, in cross-pollination, cross-pollination introduces variation in the plant, members of the plant species. So the only challenge with cross-pollination is that the members of a species need other individuals of the species for pollination to occur. But the advantage with cross-pollination is that the members of the species have got variations in them. So we find some, of course, will be better adapted to the environment than others, and environmental changes take place. Then you'll definitely end up with some members who are better adapted, surviving the calamity, and being able to propagate the species. So we don't have an entire species being wiped out by unfavorable environmental conditions. Now, once we have pollination taking place, whether it is by self-pollination or by cross-pollination, then we move on to the next step of fertilization. Now, in the process of fertilization in plants, we have, first of all, the pollen grain must land on the stigma of the plant, where the stigma is a part of the female reproductive organ. So now, when it lands on the stigma of the plant, generally, the pollen grain germinates using nutrients that are in the stigma of the plant, and it germinates forming a pollen tube. The pollen tube then grows downwards into the style being that extension that goes to the ovary. So the pollen tube now grows from the stigma where it was formed from germination and grows through the style right up to the ovary of the pistil. Now, for the pollen tube to go through the style, it is guided by the tube nucleus that is found in the pollen grain. And for the pollen tube to grow, it is basically provided the nutrients that are provided for by the cells within the style, and it is guided as to the direction to grow by the tube nucleus, and it tends to grow downwards into the ovary. So as it grows downwards, it is growing in line and in response to gravity, and also away from light. So we say the growth of the tube nucleus towards the ovary is gravimetric, meaning it grows in response to gravity, so it grows downwards. So the tube nucleus will grow within the tube, carrying the male gametes with it. As it carries the male gametes with it, within that tube nucleus, we find the male gametes. That is, basically, we have the male gamete, a generative nucleus, and the tube nucleus. So the tube nucleus is at the tip of the tube, guiding the tube downwards in the style. And as the tube grows, eventually it reaches the ovary and gets to the ovule. Now, inside the ovule, we expect in the ovule that an egg cell within the ovule, a cell within the ovule, is going to develop to form the embryo sac. And within the embryo sac is where we tend to find the egg cell. So once the pollen tube reaches the ovule containing the embryo sac within it, and the embryo sac containing the egg cell within it, we tend to find now the minute the tube nucleus is in contact with the wall of the ovule, the tube nucleus that was guiding the growth of the pollen tube ends up producing a lot of enzymes that break down the wall of the tube and also break down the walls of the ovule, such that now there is actually a throughway from the pollen tube to the ovule. So once this way is created, the tube nucleus has served its purpose by producing enzymes that create a route from the pollen tube to the ovule. And once the tube nucleus does that, it has served the purpose, it degenerates. And then we have now the generative nucleus that was in this pollen tube behind the tube nucleus, now it divides into two nuclei, which now get into the ovule and into the embryo sac. So when the two nuclei arising from the division of the generative nucleus get into the embryo sac, they find a number of nuclei within the embryo sac. In the nuclei, we tend to find, in the embryo sac rather, we tend to find 8 nuclei. In the 8 nuclei, we have got 3 on one end, on one side of the pole, and 3 on the other end of the pole. And at the center of the embryo sac, we find 2 nuclei. So 3 at each of the 2 poles, and then 2 at the center. Now the 2 at the center are normally the polar nuclei. On one end, we have got 3 nuclei that have got no association with fertilization, and we call them the antipodals. On the other end of the embryo sac, there are the 3 nuclei. One of them is the egg cell that will be fertilized to give us a zygote. The other 2 are helper cells, and they're called synergids. So when the 2 male nuclei that came from the pollen tube enter into the ovule and get to the embryo sac, we have got one of the nuclei, the male nuclei, will fuse with the polar nuclei at the center of the embryo sac, which are 2, and form a structure with 3 nuclei. So we refer to it as a triploid structure, and this triploid structure is the one that ends up forming the endosperm. And the other male nuclei will go and fuse with the egg cell on one end of the pole of the embryo sac and end up giving us a structure with 2 nuclei. So we say it is diploid structure, giving us the zygote. So in the case of fertilization now, we find during the process of fertilization, we have got 2 fertilizations taking place here. One, a fusion between one male nuclei and the polar nuclei to give us the triploid endosperm, and the other one, a fusion between a male nuclei and the egg cell to give us the diploid zygote. So because you have got 2 fertilizations taking place, we talk about a double fertilization, where the products of the double fertilization are a triploid endosperm and a diploid zygote. Now, we expect the diploid zygote now to develop further by cell division, cell expansion, and cell differentiation to form an embryo. Now, once the embryo is formed, and we have it being formed, growth then stops. And this fertilized ovule now becomes a seed. Now, as the seed is being formed, because the ovule has become fertilized and has transformed into a seed, we have the embryo within the seed only develops up to a certain point, and then development stops, such that the development will now resume later and give us a new plant in the process that we refer to as germination. But at this particular point in the seed, the embryo will only develop to a particular point, and then the growth stops. So embryo will only grow until it forms an embryonic shoot that we call the plumule, an embryonic root that we call the radicle, and embryonic leaves that we call the cotyledons or the seed leaves. The embryonic leaves that are formed, that is the cotyledons, they may be 1 or they may be 2. And then this embryo is surrounded by the endosperm that provides nutrition for the embryo. Then we have the covering that were there for the ovule become lignified and hardened and form now the protective covering for the seed. So now the fertilized ovule transforms and becomes a seed, and it can remain a seed with arrested growth for a given period of time, and that period of time is what is normally referred to as dormancy. Now, for the seed to stop the growth, what happens is that the seed now loses most of its water and becomes almost dry without the tissues in the seed dying. And as water is lost from the seed, it loses about 90% of its water and only retains about 10%. Now, with little water present, the metabolic processes stop. And that stopping of metabolic processes is what causes the growth to cease. So with that, the seed now goes into a resting phase, what is commonly referred to as the dormant phase. Now, as the seed is transforming or is being formed from the fertilized ovules, we have the ovary on the other hand that contained the ovules, but now they have become seeds. The ovary now develops and transforms to become the fruit. So basically, as the ovary becomes the fruit, in most plants, the fruit develops from the ovary. Here we have the ovary now, we end up with the covering of the ovary becoming now the coverings of the fruit. And that covering can either be soft in nature or soft and succulent in nature, or it can be hard in nature. And that protective covering of the fruit now becomes a pericarp. And on the inside, we expect to find the seeds being the ovules that became fertilized. Now, as the ovary transforms to become the fruit, in many plants, the ovary becomes the fruit, it is true. So basically the fruit develops from the ovary. But there are a few plants where you may find the fruit developing also from the other floral structures in addition to the ovary. So when that happens, you may find the other floral structures may end up being retained. When the fruit is formed purely from the ovary, a number of the rest of the floral structures will fall off as the fruit develops. But if the fruit is also formed in association with other floral structures, some of the other floral structures may be retained as the fruit develops or as the fruit forms. So now, depending on what happens during fruit formation, we end up with two main categories of fruits, where we have, if the fruit develops from the ovary and we don't have remnants of the other floral structures, then that is referred to as a true fruit, also referred to as eucarp. Where the fruit forms and there is retention of some of the other floral parts, then that fruit is referred to as a false fruit, also called as an accessory fruit, also referred to as pseudocarp. Now, once again, depending on the kind of flower we had and the number of ovaries that gave rise to the fruits that we are talking about, we can have classification of the fruits. Now, in the classification of the fruits, fruits can be classified based on the number of ovaries that were involved in the formation of the fruit. In some plants, you may find a plant has got only one ovary, which gave rise to the fruit. In some plants, you may find there are a number of ovaries that basically aggregate together. So collectively, they come together and form a fruit. In other plants, you may find here we have got a number of ovaries from many associated flowers that now give rise to a fruit. So based on what happens or we find in the ovaries, we have got different classes of fruits. So you have the classification based on the number of ovaries and number of flowers involved in the fruit formation. So you've got three classes of fruits. Number one, we have got the simple fruits. Now these are fruits that develop from a single ovary that is within a single flower. So one flower has got one ovary, which gives rise to a fruit that becomes a simple fruit. The second type of fruits that we have are the aggregate fruits. Now this is where we have a single flower, but the single flower has got multiple ovaries, and these multiple ovaries in the single flowers come together to form a fruit. So this fruit arising from multiple ovaries contained in one flower, we refer to it as an aggregate fruit. And the fruit from the individual ovaries are referred to as fruitlets. And then thirdly, we have got the multiple fruits. Now, multiple fruit is here we have multiple ovaries in multiple associated flowers that are more or less united in a mass, and they give rise to a fruit. So this fruit arising from an association of multiple ovaries in multiple flowers is a multiple fruit. And that's the much we shall look at as far as the fruits are concerned. Now, in relation to the fruits, here is an exercise that you can try out on your own, basically to look at the different types of fruits there are. So you have an activity here involving classification of a tomato, where you can find a tomato. A tomato qualifies to be a fruit, and look at the tomato and identify aspects of the tomato. Figure out where the petals are attached. Look at the ovary. Figure out the structure of the ovary of the tomato, and so forth. So here is an activity for you to do as far as the tomato is concerned. Now, we can do further reading in terms of what you have discussed, so that we can actually clarify and even further to what has been covered. And with that, we come to the end of our lesson. Thank you and stay safe.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.